As you can see by this mind map, there is a significant number of things that actually contribute to meat quality. So starting from the top, the nutrition of the animal prior to slaughter, prior to being sent to the processors. So things like grain-fed, grass-fed, animals should be on a rising plane of nutrition. The social environment, animals that are bullied, or animals that are stressed because they don't have other animals around them are going to have low muscle glycogen, and that's going to contribute to poor meat eating quality. How it's cooked is also particularly important. The muscle type depends entirely, the cooking should depend entirely on the type of the muscle. So muscles with more connective tissue, such as the brisket, any of the locomotive muscles, should be cooked slower in order to break down that connective tissue, which will then help meat eating quality. Aging time is the time between rigor and in the chiller after rigor, because that's what contributes to the amount of relaxation of the muscle fibres. How they're handled after slaughter as well is particularly important, and how they're slaughtered, because that's got to do with the amount of, how they're actually slaughtered has got to do with the amount of stress, same as the pre-slaughter handling, so how much stress they've actually undergone, because that affects the muscle glycogen. Lairage is the step before slaughter, so the amount of time that they're actually held in the lairage area is important, and the conditions. So again, that relates to stress, as does animal handling. Disease, so some beef measles was an issue there for a little while. Anything that's caused issues like grass seeds, that's the stuff that can cause poor meat quality, liver fluke, etc. How their transport relates to stress. So a lot of these points definitely relate straight to stress. Slaughter weight, so that's their weight that they are at the time. I'm going to add age in there too, actually, because their age has an impact on how their meat actually tastes and the quality that it is. The climate, so particularly hot days, again causes stress, will deplete muscle glycogen, and that will contribute to poor meat eating quality. And genetics, so you can select for muscling, you can select for marbling. For example, breeds like Wagyu are destined mainly for the Asian markets because of the amount of marbling they've got in their carcass, which contributes then to to meat eating quality and juiciness and flavour. So as you can see, there's a significant number of factors that actually do contribute to meat eating quality. So this is how muscle gets converted to meat. Basically, after slaughter, the animal is drained of its blood. Now, muscles use oxygen up during this time normally, and obviously there's no blood to actually carry the oxygen around. It depletes its oxygen supply fairly quickly because the muscles are still living, even though the animal's been slaughtered. So what the muscles actually do is they use the sugars that are stored inside the muscles called glycogen, and they use a pathway without any oxygen, which creates lactic acid as a byproduct. Now, normally, lactic acid in a live animal would be taken to the liver and converted. But because there's no blood flow, it can't be converted to, it can't go anywhere, so it actually ends up dropping the pH of the meat. Now, because it drops the pH of the meat, it causes calcium to leak into the muscle fibres, and that's what causes contraction or rigor. So rigor mortis occurs 6 to 12 hours after death, and what that is the calcium is what causes things to contract. So it goes from relaxing to contracting. It's where the muscle filaments all slide in to one another, and it actually takes energy to make these relax. If the body has run out of energy, it can't make them relax anymore, so you get this permanent contraction called rigor. Now, once rigor has occurred, about 48 hours later, proteolytic enzymes start to cause aging. Now, what that is these little proteins that are present inside the muscles that cause breakdown of proteins. They get in there and they actually break down where the actin and the myosin attach to each other, and they cause the muscles to relax again. And this is aging that is really, really important, in particular for meat tenderness. So without that aging process, the meat no longer becomes tender. The other problem is glycogen. So, in particular, if you don't have a lot of glycogen in the muscle to start with, you're not going to get enough lactic acid to drop the pH enough to get this chain reaction where you get the rigor and then your enzyme. So you're not going to drop the pH enough to actually do it. And that's where you get what's called a dark, firm and dry meat. And it's usually caused by things like stress, by nutrition, or poor nutrition in particular. So transport, bruising, all that sort of stuff can cause depletion of glycogen. And that's what adversely affects meat quality. The glycogen bucket is a really good analogy for determining what actually happens to the muscles when there's low glycogen. So if your nutrition's right, your glycogen bucket is full. And an animal that's handled with fairly low stress, there'll only be a little bit go out at each point. So a bit of transport, there's always going to be a bit of stress, handling, and then obviously stress caused by the slaughter method itself and lairage and that sort of stuff. But you're still going to have even though you lose a little bit, you're still going to have a significant amount left there for lactic acid production, which is obviously going to decrease your pH, which is then going to lead to more tender meat. Now, an animal that starts with a full glycogen bucket, but then has a bit of a rough time on transport and loses a significant amount of energy through, well, glycogen through transport, is handled with a prodder or just roughly in general, and then subjected to a significant amount of stress during lairage, where they're sort of, before they wait for the abattoirs, is obviously going to lose a significant amount of glycogen out of the muscles, and that's what's going to cause your high pH, because there's not enough glycogen in there to produce enough lactic acid to lower the pH to the required amount in order to cause the tenderness due to the aging process. This graph shows what happens to the pH over time with what's called a dark, firm and dry carcass or meat. And it's, again, due to the lack of glycogen in the muscles, lack of pH, therefore the pH isn't lowered, and it gives this real blackish sort of dark red, and they're usually very, very tough. And as you can see here, the pH really hasn't dropped much below 7 over the 24 hours, yet in a normal carcass, the pH drops below sort of about 5.5. Which is where it needs to be in order for the aging process to occur. Now, PSE stands for pale, soft and exudative. It really only occurs in pigs. It's not really of much concern in beef cattle, and it's where the lactic acid there's too much produced, and as a result you get meat that is really mushy, pale, and doesn't hold any water at all, hence the term exudative. So anything that actually reduces glycogen depletion is going to improve meat eating quality, and there's several factors that they recommend that producers do. So these are the meat industry bodies to maximise their meat eating quality through glycogen levels. Now the first one's nutrition, so making sure that your animals are on what's called a rising plane of nutrition prior to slaughter. So that's why a lot of producers will grain feed. However, it's perfectly okay to be able to finish them on pasture. They just need to be growing at a certain rate. That's what a rising plane of nutrition actually means. If you're starving them, they're utilising their their glycogen in their muscles, and they're not putting on weight. They'll become tough and dark cutting. Another thing that's really important is their health. So you can see an animal over here with lice. If they've got either internal or external parasites, or if they're unhealthy in any way, so they've got a disease of some sort, whether it be a clostridial type disease or BVDV or something like that, then they're not going to be putting their energy that they actually eat into their muscles. They'll be putting it into fighting whatever that disease is. So in this case, see the lice rub patches on this animal, they'll actually be causing bruising as well as as health issues, I suppose. Worms is another big problem. If they're going to get worms, if it's not treated, then they actually take nutrients off the animals, so therefore they won't be putting them to their muscle. Now, bruising can be caused by, it's also linked to handling as well, but bruising can be caused by a few things. One's horns. So a lot of producers have opted to go either into dehorning, or they've opted to go into polled. So you can select animals on polled now, which means they don't have any horns, so you don't get as much bruising on the carcass. So bruising is where it ends up going dark as well, because of the inflammation in the area. Bruising can also be caused by loading, by using polypipe and animals banging into each other, as well as things like prodders. I've actually seen a carcass that's been prodded with a prodder, and it had two black marks. You could clearly see, this is over the loin, where the two marks were, and the amount of value that's gone down the drain because of these black marks in probably in the loin area. So up in this area here, that they haven't been able to use at the abattoir. They basically had to cut it off and throw it away, and that's eye muscle. So that's, I think in the supermarkets alone, it's about $45 a kilo at the moment. So highly valued meat going down the drain. Handling's another really important one. So that includes your transport and your handling in the yards, the way they're handled at the abattoirs. A lot of the feedlots they use purely low stress stock handling. In fact, I know that Tabata out near Griffith, you can't use dogs at all. So, because dogs in particular will cause both bruising and issues with handling. If you run an animal ragged before it goes on the truck or before it gets slaughtered, you're going to end up with less glycogen. So this is over here is low stress stock handling techniques, which a few of you would have learnt about recently in the livestock handling school. The other important thing about trucking them is to do with nutrition. You don't dehydrate them, because if you dehydrate them, then you're going to have more issues again with meat eating quality.